Okay, hi class. We're going to look at this text for English Language Paper 1, Question 4. And Question 4 is what we call the evaluation question. Okay, because we have to evaluate the statement that we're given. So you're always given a statement, a quotation. This is not a quotation from the text. This is someone else's view on the text. So for this one it says, the writer effectively creates an atmosphere that suggests everything is not as it should be. Okay, so we've got to focus on whether we think this writer creates an atmosphere where everything is not as it should be. So really what that means is everything seems strange or unusual or different. Okay, so you need to make sure that you've got everything that I write down on my sheet written down. It may be that you want to make notes in your book. You can put the title homework, or you can make the notes on the sheet like me. So once you've had this statement, this quotation, it will then always say, to what extent do you agree? So it's saying like that you've got to agree, but to what extent? Do you really agree that that's it? Or is there something else you can say as well? And that's what I would suggest you do on this question, is you want to say, yes, I agree and this is why, but you've also got to say what else you think about the atmosphere, because that's the key thing that we've got to write about here. So what this question's really asking for is our own ideas. It's also wanting us to say how this atmosphere is created. So that's asking us to write about methods. Now this time you can mix language and structure. Okay? So it's going to be testing our use of subject terminology, just like all the other questions. And it's going to be testing our use of quotations. So as we read through and make sense of this text, we're going to be thinking about these three things. So it's from a book called The Day of the Triffids, and it's the first chapter, and it starts The End Begins. Now here we've got the word end with the word begin. These two words are opposite. Okay, so we could say these two words are juxtaposed. But here's a fancy term for you. When you have two opposite words put together like this, it's called an oxymoron. So this would be like saying something like, the silence was deafening. And I guess that means, when it's so quiet, you're kind of really aware and like waiting for a sound. But it can't possibly be deafening because silence is quiet. Okay? So we've got this oxymoron to begin with. Let's put a definition as well. Two words together with opposite meaning. I'll be testing you on that first thing, okay, in our next lesson. So we can say something about the methods. We're using some subject terminology, but we've got to relate it back to this. Do we agree that this is creating an atmosphere where everything is not as it should be? Well, yes, this oxymoron is confusing and kind of nonsensical for the reader, which definitely sets up this idea that things don't seem to be as they should. Okay? Alright, let's carry on reading. When a day that you happen to know is Wednesday starts off sounding like Sunday, there is something seriously wrong somewhere. Okay, well, yeah, obviously the writer straight away is telling us directly that things are not as they seem. So we can already say here, this quotation is going to be useful. There is something seriously wrong somewhere. This definitely tells us that things are not as they should be. But this idea of something seriously wrong suggests that the narrator is worried, maybe. it's also quite unusual because it says that when a day that you happen to know. So it's almost like it's directly addressing the reader. And we know that this little word here is a pronoun. So we're trying to use our subject terminology whilst we're picking out our quotations. And again, we're saying, well, yeah, definitely this is creating an atmosphere that everything is not as it should be, because he's directly telling us that he's worried that things are not as they seem. Wednesdays feel like Sundays, or sound like Sundays. Okay, but also maybe this leaves us as the reader thinking, well, what does a Sunday sound like? So it gives us these questions as well. So questions for the reader. What does a Sunday sound like? So there's loads we can say certainly about that first bit. I felt that from the moment I woke, and yet when I started functioning a little more sharply, I misgave. After all, it was the odds were that it was I who was wrong, and not everyone else, though I did not see how that could be. I went on waiting, tinged with doubt. Okay, so we've got this phrase here suggesting that the narrator is unsure. But if we're thinking about the methods, if you're tinged with something, it's only a small amount. Okay? And also, the narrator's already said to us, the odds were that it was I who was wrong. So really, actually, maybe it's not that the atmosphere is strange, it's that the narrator has made some kind of mistake or misunderstood something. But presently I had my first bit of objective evidence. A distant clock struck what sounded to me like 8. I listened hard and suspiciously. Soon another clock began on a loud, decisive note. In a leisurely fashion, it gave an indisputable 8. Then I knew things were awry. If things were awry, it was wrong. So the vocabulary here, the fact that he's suspicious, the fact that he's tinged with doubt, suggests that everything is not as it should be, but it doesn't seem at this point confusing for the reader. It's 8 o'clock. So maybe we could say here, to what extent do we agree? Well, we agree at this point it's confusing or not as it should be. For the narrator, but at this point information is definitely being withheld from us, but we don't seem to know why it's different for us, like why things aren't as they should be for us. But the reader doesn't understand why. And if we think of this sort of from almost like a structural point of view, well, we don't know who this person is, we don't know where they are, so there's a lot of information that is being withheld from us. Withheld. We don't know who, we don't know where, and maybe actually that does create this impression that things aren't as they should be, because we don't really know what's going on. This is the beginning of a novel, and normally we would find these things out. The way I came to miss the end of the world, well, the end of the world I had known for close on 30 years, was sheer accident, like a lot of survival when you come to think of it. In the nature of things, a good many somebodies are always in hospital, and the law of averages had picked on me to be one of them a week or so before. So finally we find out where he is. He's in hospital. It might just as easily have been the week before that, in which case I'd not be writing now. I'd not be here at all. But chance played that I should be in hospital at that particular time, that my eyes, and indeed my whole head, should be wreathed in bandages, and that's why I have to be grateful to whoever orders these averages. At the time, however, I was only peevish, wondering what in thunder went on, for I'd been in the place long enough to know that next to the matron, the clock is the most sacred thing in a hospital. So again, maybe we've got the sense that the atmosphere is not as it should be, but actually we don't know what it should be. And again, we've been told that this man's whole head is wreathed in bandages. We've been told that he is in hospital, but we still don't know who he is. I'm just going to get it for you. And we still don't know what is going on. And if we go back to the start of this paragraph, he says, the way I came to miss the end of the world. Well, if it's the end of the world, then how is he able to tell us? So it sounds like he's maybe being a little bit over the top here. So, if we're going to use kind of more dramatic or more academic language, we can say he's being hyperbolic here. This narrator seems to be exaggerating. And maybe we don't really know what to believe, because the reader still has a lot of questions. Now, maybe the writer and the narrator, are doing this deliberately. The writer is really the person crafting behind it, but the words that they're giving to the narrator are deliberately withholding information from us about why his eyes are bandaged, why he's in hospital, why it's the end of the world, in order to get us to read on, but also in order to kind of create this sense of confusion. So maybe we'd say, well, yeah, we do agree that actually everything is not as it should be, but we don't even know what it should be. So we could say here that the atmosphere for the reader is confusing. It's deliberately vague. So here you can start to see how we're saying to what extent do we agree. Well, we do agree, but we also agree something else. We actually think, we think something else. We think that it's not that everything isn't as it should be. We think it is confusing and deliberately vague. And why is the writer being deliberately vague? In order to make the reader feel uncomfortable. And in order to make us read it. So I'll just move that down so you can see my notes there. So here what I'm saying is we've still got a lot of questions, and as well as agreeing that the atmosphere suggests that everything is not as it should be, we think the atmosphere is confusing and deliberately vague, and the writer's doing that in order to make the reader feel uncomfortable. Now, at any point when you need to stop, if you need to stop the video to catch up on notes, that's absolutely fine. So you might want to pause now, and then I'm going to carry on reading. Without a clock, the place simply couldn't latch. Each second there's someone consulting it on births, deaths, doses, meals, lights, talking, working, sleeping, resting, visiting, dressing, washing. And hitherto it had decreed that someone should begin to wash and tidy me up at exactly 3 minutes after 7 a.m. That was one of the best reasons I had for appreciating a private room. In a public ward, the messy proceeding would have taken place a whole unnecessary hour earlier, but here today clocks of varying reliability were continuing to strike 8 in all directions, and still nobody had shown up. Okay, so we've also got this kind of idea of the clock that keeps coming back. We've got the kind of clock here, and we've got the bit about it being a distant clock struck here, and we've got this focus on the time here. So remember, if we've got an idea that keeps repeating through the novel, we call that, or a piece of text, we call that a motif. And that can be actually a structural and a language technique. So we can start to appreciate the motif of the clock, because actually we know that this man can't see anything. So this motif of the clock takes on a kind of heightened significance. That means it's more important because this man can't see. He is reliant on his hearing. So this is another piece of evidence that actually, yes, the atmosphere suggests that everything is not as it should be, but actually life even before this, things have changed for this man, and things are not as they should be for the narrator. He's obviously got used to not being able to see, his eyes are bandaged, and now he's having to get used to the fact that for some reason, he should be sort of washed and woken up at 7 o'clock every morning, but actually it's 8 o'clock and still nobody has shown up. So again, things aren't as they should be because we don't know where these people are. And this is kind of exaggerated by the fact that this man can't see, because he doesn't know whether those people are there or that he just can't hear them. So his blindness exaggerates the issue. Much as I disliked the sponging process, and as useless as it had been to suggest that the help of a guiding hand as far as the bathroom could eliminate it, its failure to occur was highly disconcerting. So although he's saying normally he doesn't like it anyway, and if they helped him to the bathroom he'd be able to do it himself, but he now feels quite disconcerted, kind of quite out of sorts, I guess, to suggest that this suddenly isn't happening. Besides, it was normally a close forerunner of breakfast, and I was feeling hungry. Probably I would have been aggrieved about it any morning, but today, this Wednesday the 8th of May, was an occasion of particular personal importance. I was doubly anxious to get all the fuss and routine over, because that was the day they were going to take off my bandages. I groped around a bit to find the bell push, and let them have a full 5 seconds clatter, just to show I was thinking of them. While I was waiting for the pretty short-tempered response that such appeal ought to bring, I went on listening. So here we've got this kind of anticipation of the fact that he was going to take his bandages off, but also the letdown of the fact that he's listening and nothing seems to be coming. So we've got this kind of anticipation kind of creeping in again here, waiting for someone's response. The day outside, I realised now, was sounding even more wrong than I had thought. The noises it made, or failed to make, were more like Sunday than Sunday itself, and I'd come round again to being absolutely assured that it was Wednesday, whatever else had happened to it. So again, it's not the noises that he can particularly hear, it's the lack of noise, both inside and outside the building. He can't hear people moving around, he can't hear people outside, and that is what is creating this sense that things aren't as they should be. So not only are we starting to feel confused, but maybe we're starting to feel a bit sort of almost fearful at this point. We don't know what's happened, and the fact that this man can't see makes him more vulnerable in some way. So this lack of noise plus the guy's blindness create this sense of vulnerability. My spelling's off. Vulnerability. Okay, so he's vulnerable because he can't see, and he's dependent on others. So we can see that here when he says things like a guiding hand. He's dependent on others. So also maybe this kind of dependence on others is saying, well, yeah, things are strange, but maybe he's sort of more sensitive to changes of environment because of his reliance on other people. Why the founders of St Mary's Hospital chose to erect their institution on a main road crossing upon a valuable office site and thus expose their patients' nerves to constant laceration is a foible that I never properly understood. But for those fortunate enough to be suffering from complaints unaffected by the wear and tear of continuous traffic, it did have the advantage that one could lie abed and still not be out of touch, so to speak, with the flow of life. Customarily, the westbound buses thundered along, trying to beat the lights at the corner, as often as not the pig squeal of brakes and a salvo of shots from the silencer would tell that they hadn't. Then the released cross traffic would rev and roar as it started up the incline. and every now and then there would be an interlude, a good grinding bump followed by general stoppage, exceedingly tantalizing to one in my condition, where the extent of the contretemps had been judged entirely by the degree of profanity resulting. Certainly neither by day nor during most of the night was there any chance of the St. Mirren patient being under the impression that the common round had stopped just because he personally was on the shelf for a moment. Okay, so here we've got a lot of talk about what things are like usually. And let's just sort of go back and have a look at what he says. So it's telling us that the hospital was on a kind of on a main road, and it builds up all the noises. So customarily, like what is usually the custom, what usually happened, the buses thundered along. So we've got this verb that suggests a kind of violent, powerful, even aggressive noise, trying to beat the lights at the corner, as often not a pig squeal of brakes. Okay, so again, this word to describe or phrase to describe the brakes, pig squeal, giving us the sense of it's high pitched, maybe even sort of painful or animalistic. And this description of the sound just helped to heighten the lack of sound. So we've got a real contrast here between what it's normally like and now. And that's really to helping to heighten the sense of silence that's going on at the moment. Okay, sorry, I should just say pause. I'll put, you pause it there if you still need to write those notes. So we just got to this bit here, but this morning was different. So having told us what it used to be like and what it's normally like, we've got this kind of statement sentence here where he's emphatically stating this is what it is. This morning was different. So it's not just an atmosphere that things are not what they seem. We are being directly told that as well. Disturbingly, because mysteriously different. No wheels rumbled, no buses roared, no sound of any car of any kind, in fact, was to be heard. No brakes, no horns, not even the clopping of the few rare horses that still occasionally passed, nor, as there should be at such an hour, the composite tramp of work-bound feet. So he can't even hear any people in the workplace. Now this kind of repetition and listing of all the sounds that are missing, the lack of sounds, contrast, and it builds towards the fact that not only can he not hear anything outside, but he can't feel anything inside. So this lack of sounds is really emphasizing his loneliness potentially, and his isolation. And we've got a sense of how kind of unbelievable it is that there could be no one. The more I listened, the queerer it seemed. Here, queer is meaning strange, and the less I cared for it. In what I reckon to be 10 minutes of careful listening, I heard 5 sets of shuffling, hesitating footsteps, 3 voices bawling unintelligibly in the distance, and the hysterical sobs of a woman. There was not the cooing of a pigeon, not the chirp of a sparrow, nothing but the humming of wires in the wind. So now he is starting to hear sounds, but they're quite unusual sounds. We've got shuffling, hesitating, and bawling. Now if you remember these kind of words, or we'll get a list of words that end ing, these are called present participles. These words that end ing. And these sounds are unnerving. Remember, we've got to analyse the methods. So We've got shuffling and hesitating. So this suggests that maybe these people don't want to be heard. Or they don't want to be detected in some way. We've also got unintelligible bawling in the distance. So bawling is crying, but it also makes us think of a baby. So maybe it's making us think of someone innocent that needs protecting, or someone who is in pain, either mentally or physically. But again, all these sounds are unnerving sounds. So not only is this creating an atmosphere that things are not as they should be, but actually now we're getting to a point where actually the atmosphere that's being created is something is seriously wrong. So this is what's going to help us get good marks as well, because remember this question is asking us, to what extent do we agree? So rather than just saying, yep, I agree, and this is what I think, we're also offering our own ideas, all right? And you may have your own ideas as you read through it as well. A nasty, empty feeling began to crawl up inside me. Now, this is really interesting here because up until this point, he's just been telling us how he feels and what he's doing. But now it moves to his focus on his feelings. And a kind of negative language that we're getting here in terms of nasty and empty, and even to crawl up inside me. You know, we imagine with that verb there, crawl, some kind of like nasty insect or something. And it's this idea that he's kind of being taken over by something else. Something's crawling up inside him. But equally, this emptiness is kind of again reminding us of how isolated he is in the world. It was the same sensation I used to have sometimes as a child when when I got to fancying that horrors were lurking in the shadowy corners of the bedroom, when I didn't dare put a foot out for fear that something should reach from under the bed and grab my ankle, daren't even reach for the switch lest the movement should cause something to leap at me. I had to fight down the feeling, just as I had to when I was a kid, and it was no easier. It's surprising how much you don't grow out of it when it comes to the test. The elemental fears were still marching along, waiting their chance, and pretty nearly getting it, just because my eyes were bandaged and the traffic had stopped. So we've got this sense that by the end, he is actually paralysed by fear. He daren't put a foot out here, and he daren't even reach for the switch. So by the end, this is not just things aren't as they should be. This is a man who is completely paralysed by his fear. And you just think, gosh, he probably just wants to kind of rip off his bandages and see what's going on. But essentially it focuses all the way through on things sounding different, and it's only then sort of when he hears the different sounds that this then translates into him actually feeling different. Right up until the end, he seems to just be very matter-of-fact about it. So the other thing that we can write about in terms of tone, in terms of methods, is the tone. So to start off with, although things are strange, the tone is very matter-of-fact. But it becomes increasingly fearful, doesn't it, as it moves on. All right, so we can see where it's being matter-of-fact, where it says things like, but this morning was different, or where it's just listing all the things here. It seems like he's just going, yeah, well, things are weird, but, sort of seems to be quite accepting of it. And he seems to just, he said he listens for 10 minutes. So all the way through, he seems to be quite accepting. You can even add that as well. So now we've made those notes in terms of tone. The narrator seems to be quite accepting of the fact that things aren't as they should be, but it becomes increasingly fearful towards the end. And that's when he kind of compares himself to a child. when I was a kid in the dark. Again, starting to kind of create sympathy here from the reader for him, because we imagine him feeling vulnerable and innocent like a child. So there's loads there. That might, although that video is 30 minutes long, it might take you a bit longer because you've got to pause. But let's go back and have a look at the question again. So, the writer effectively creates an atmosphere that suggests everything is not as it should be. To what extent do you agree? Well, hopefully we've got loads of notes there. When we're in the lesson, the other things that we want you to be able to write about is what happens in this text. So it might be that, now we've made all those notes, that you just want to read through it again and just jot down some bullet points in terms of a summary in your book somewhere. You can just put a little title homework and make some notes about what you think this extract is about. And then in lesson, we'll start to sort of feedback on this and have a go at looking at how we then analyse the question, answer the question. All right?